just being let loose. International law is more complicated than that. And that's also as you have Iran now accusing the United States of attacking civilian infrastructure with no military purpose. With the country's foreign minister writing in a statement on Saturday that the U.S. committed a blatant and desperate crime by attacking a freshwater desalination plant and claiming the water supply in 30 villages has been impacted, and adding, attacking Iran's infrastructure is a dangerous move with grave consequences. The U.S. set this precedent, not Iran. And then with that, the next day, Bahrain announced that an Iranian drone had caused material damage to a desalination plant there, although there was reportedly no impact on water supplies or water network capacity. But the potential impact if there was more damage there, it's massive, with one expert telling the Times. In the Gulf, desalination facilities are not merely infrastructure. They are essential lifelines that supply drinking water to millions. Striking them risks turning a military confrontation into a direct threat to civilian survival. And so that situation is definitely one we're gonna have to keep an eye on, but for now, Iran's focus mostly seems to be on other targets. And so today, for example, you had NATO air defenses shooting down what Turkey said was an Iranian missile heading its way, with this being the second time that's happened. And so again, that's raised concerns about the possibility of NATO getting roped into all this. But then also, as far as other Iranian strikes, some today reportedly wounded more than 30 people in Bahrain and sparked a fire near a petroleum refinery. Also, at least one person was killed in Israel, and Saudi Arabia actually reported its first deaths recently. They said that a military projectile fell onto a residential area and killed 2 people of Indian and Bangladeshi nationality. And overall, though, the hundreds of missiles and drones that Iran has fired at not only military targets, but also civilian infrastructure, including airports, hotels, and energy facilities in nearly a dozen countries, has killed at least 20 people so far. And among those killed have been American service members. And actually with that, you had Trump attending what's known as a dignified transfer ceremony for 6 of them on Saturday, all of which were killed after an Iranian drone strike in Kuwait just a day after the war began. But also with this, you had Trump pissing some people off for keeping his hat on during the ceremony, with, for example, the California governor writing, "Take your hat off, you disgusting little man," and former RNC chairman Michael Steele adding, "This fool has absolutely no sense of dignity of appreciation for the moment." What then sparked even more backlash was Fox News' apparent attempt to hide it. Because Fox News viewers, they were shown an old video of Trump at a similar ceremony back in December. And notably, he did not wear a hat to salute troops who had died in Syria. And even then, when the network finally aired a report that included footage from Saturday, it was edited to avoid showing Trump wearing his hat. A hat that, notably, he was also photographed wearing while golfing yesterday in Florida and is also sold by the Trump Organization for $55. But also with this, getting back to the death toll, yesterday you had the Pentagon revealing that a 7th U.S. service member has now been killed. And while they haven't been publicly identified yet, he or she was reportedly seriously injured on March 1st when Iran struck a Saudi military base where American troops were stationed. With that person then dying from those injuries on Saturday night while officials were preparing a transfer for more advanced medical care at an American military hospital in Germany. And at the same time, interestingly, Israel only reported its first soldier deaths this weekend, saying that 2 were killed in fighting Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. Where hundreds of thousands have been displaced, the death toll is approaching 500, and Israel has now been accused of illegally using white phosphorus over residential areas, a move that's considered illegal because of the indiscriminate and long-lasting harm that it can cause to civilians. And notably, that's happening as people in Iran may also be getting exposed to dangerous chemicals thanks to Israel. And that's because it hit 30 Iranian fuel depots on Saturday, including 4 in and around Tehran, sparking a massive fire that could be seen throughout the city and blanketing the city in heavy smoke. And with that, you had the Iranian Red Crescent Society warning that the toxic chemicals now in the air could lead to acid rain. And that is you had a UK-based doctor telling The Guardian that the toxic gases and fine particulate matter could irritate the eyes and airways, worsen asthma, pulmonary conditions, and heart disease, and increase the risks of some cancers. And also, notably here, the Israeli strikes reportedly sparked the first significant disagreement between Israel and the United States since the war began, with sources telling Axios that the U.S. is worried that Israeli strikes on infrastructure that serve ordinary Iranians could backfire strategically, rallying them around the regime and even driving up oil prices. So of course, oil prices are already being driven up. Right? Prices have been climbing since the war broke out, and Iran effectively shut down the Strait of Hormuz, which normally transits 20% of the world's oil and natural gas, by threatening to attack tankers that travel through the essential waterway. But in the past 24 hours, the situation escalated dramatically, with oil prices surging to nearly $120 per barrel overnight before then falling to around $100 early this morning. I mean, we're talking about the highest prices since Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022. Oil's almost 50% more expensive than it was before Israel and the United States started attacking Iran less than 2 weeks ago. And already you have Americans paying higher prices at the pump. According to AAA, average gas prices have jumped 50 cents per gallon just in the last week alone, surging from $2.98 to $3.45. And you have analysts predicting that gas will reach $4 per gallon this week, which is the price you can usually expect to see when the cost per barrel reaches around $100. So also understand, it could go even higher than that if barrel costs continue to rise. I mean, you have some experts warning that we we could actually see oil prices hitting an all-time high of $148 this week. That would break the previous record that was set in 2008. And then those surging prices could set off a chain reaction of sweeping economic consequences. But rising fuel costs, it impacts the entire global supply chain. And when operating becomes more expensive for businesses, they pass those costs on to the consumer. And while the effects will mostly be felt in Asia and Europe, which rely more heavily on the Middle East for oil and natural gas, this is still very much a global issue, which is already clearly evidenced by the skyrocketing prices we're seeing worldwide today. And so with this, you have the managing director of the IMF also warning that a prolonged conflict in Iran could push global inflation higher. And then at the same time, you have analysts in the US specifically raising concerns about stagflation as inflation increases and growth slows. And these new fears, they're coming at a time when many Americans are already worried about the economy and rising prices. And all these worries, we saw that being reflected in global stock markets today, which absolutely tanked when they opened this morning. The Dow, NASDAQ, and S&P 500 all went down about 1% as of recording. Japan's index fell a whopping 5%, and European markets shed 1 to 2%. But in addition to the economic impacts, the rising oil prices are also significant because of the signal they send about the war itself. Right? While prices have been rising since the war broke out, they were more modest because traders calculated that markets could easily absorb a short disruption. The surges that we're seeing today, it indicates that the traders are worried that the war is going to drag on. But at the same time, you have Trump repeatedly seeking to downplay those concerns, telling reporters last week that he isn't concerned and that prices will go up, but promising that they will come down very fast. But at least so far, prices have continued to do the exact opposite. And yesterday, you had Trump trying to address those concerns, but basically saying that anyone who's concerned about the price of oil is an idiot. Writing on Truth Social, short-term oil prices, which will drop rapidly when the destruction of the Iran nuclear threat is over, is a very small price to pay for USA and world safety and peace. Only fools would think differently. And with that, he then told CBS today that he thinks the war is very complete, pretty much, and that led oil prices to drop down again. But of course, you have many saying that Trump might just be saying that so the market will react, especially as it contradicts repeated claims from top officials who have said that what we're seeing now is just the beginning of the offensive. You know, if that's the case, you have experts saying that there's not much that'll help as long as the strait remains closed. And actually, to that point, you had Macron saying that France will launch a joint effort to escort container ships in the Strait of Hormuz once the initial conflict has calmed down some. And you've had Trump as well, also previously floating the idea of dispatching the U.S. Navy to do the same. Though also with that, I have to note that administration officials have downplayed that possibility, at least for now. But also Trump and other members of the administration have been so inconsistent and out of step with one another throughout this whole thing that who really knows what they're going to do? Trump first suggested that the attack was meant to create the conditions for the Iranian people to rise up and overthrow their government. But then Marco Rubio argued that the strike had been necessary because Iran posed an imminent threat, suggesting that Israel was going to attack with or without the United States and Iran would retaliate against American forces. But then there's also reason to believe that the administration could have held Israel back, but chose not to. The U.S. actually actively took part in planning the attack, and Trump himself said that, if anything, he might have forced Israel's hand, not the other way around. And so Rubio backtracked while both he and Pete Hegseth downplayed Trump's initial suggestion that regime change has been an objective, with him arguing that the real goal was to permanently destroy Iran's nuclear program and eliminate its ability to launch missiles at Israel, nearby Arab countries, and the United States in the future. Though, of course, notably, American intelligence has assessed within the past year that Iran was not actively building nuclear weapons and is years away from developing missiles capable of reaching the United States. And in any case, while his cronies make that argument, you've just had Trump going back to the regime change argument. Right on Friday, you had him telling CNN that he's not worried about whether Iran becomes a democracy, but he is going to get someone of his choosing in power, saying it's going to work very easily. It's going to work like in Venezuela. And that's even as those around him have reportedly told him repeatedly that this is an entirely different situation and has been since before it began. And with all this, the Washington Post reporting on a classified intelligence report completed about a week before the war that even a large-scale assault would be unlikely to get rid of the regime. And to that point, Iran has now officially named its new supreme leader, with Iran's assembly of experts electing the 56-year-old son of the previous supreme leader who was killed in the initial strike. So now the new leader will have final say over matters of state, serving as commander-in-chief of the military and a powerful paramilitary revolutionary guard. He'll also have authority over a stockpile of highly enriched uranium that could be used to build a nuclear weapon at some point. But then also, beyond his official role and title, he's kind of a relative unknown even within Iran. That said, though, according to reports, he's been an influential figure operating in the shadows, coordinating military and intelligence operations for his father. He's also a hardliner with very close ties to the Revolutionary Guard Corps and was reportedly considered to be their candidate of choice. But while this new leader has largely remained somewhat of a mystery, you have Vladimir Putin offering his unwavering support for the new leader. Israel's already threatened to kill him, and Trump has previously said that this person would be unacceptable to him as supreme leader. Right? And you also had Trump making more comments recently suggesting that he'll do whatever it takes to get his way, writing on social media on Friday, "There will be no deal with Iran except unconditional surrender," and then adding, "After that, in the selection of a great and acceptable leader, we and many of our wonderful and very brave allies and partners will work tirelessly getting Iran back from the brink of destruction, making it economically bigger, better, and stronger than ever before. Iran will have a great future. Make Iran great again." When he had reporters on Air Force One asking him what he meant by this, he said,
"It's where they cry uncle, or when they can't fight any longer and there's nobody around to cry uncle." that could happen too, because we've wiped out their leadership numerous times.
But with that, you've had White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt, as usual, trying to qualify Trump's statement. But they're saying that when Trump determines that Iran no longer poses a threat to the United States of America and the goal of Operation Epic Fury has been fully realized, then Iran will essentially be in a place of unconditional surrender. But others have also interpreted unconditional surrender as meaning something very different, including Tucker Carlson.
Unconditional surrender means foreign troops get to rape your wife and daughter if they want. And everyone knows that. And that has been, if there's one consistent lesson of history, it means unconditional surrender means foreign troops get to rape your wife and daughter. Everyone can feel that. That's like the most atavistic instinct there is. And so to avoid that, people will do anything. And so that's why it requires that level of force to get a population subdued to the point of unconditional surrender. That's why. And so in this case, of course, we don't have the ground force necessary. I don't think Americans would voluntarily participate in it. I just don't think we can do that. It would require weapons of mass destruction. It would require presumably nuclear weapons in order to do that. And let's not lie to ourselves. We're moving toward that.
And there is a lot that Carlson is saying there. What's very wild is that there is some logic hidden there, and that Trump has presented the only acceptable outcome as the end of the regime, and that means that they have no reason to compromise. And despite the U.S. and Israel's military advantage, it may take them more than 3 to 4 weeks to take down a government that has been fighting for its life and may only be opening the door to further escalation. But of course, everything is developing in real time, so I'd love to know your thoughts, feelings, and reactions to everything you're seeing so far in those comments. And in the meantime, of course, we have our eyes glued on this. And then there's more we got to dive into in just a minute. But first, let me thank a sponsor and say, small business life, it means hustling and figuring it all out. And payroll day, it shouldn't feel like you're diffusing a bomb. Right? Well, Slack pings you and your bank app judges. And today's sponsor, Gusto, it's online payroll and benefits software built for small businesses, simple, remote friendly, and actually easy to use. Gusto puts payroll, hiring, onboarding, and support all in one place, and it automates taxes and direct deposits, so you're not trapped in spreadsheet hell. They also handle benefits like health coverage, commuter perks, workers' comp, even 401k options, and it's certified.
No, that doesn't count.
And in the media as a right-wing provocateur.
And it sounds like J6, which was the most American thing in history. So, we have the power. We are the people. And if we want to get somebody out of prison, this is our country. We have the right to self-determination.
And you might remember this guy from a previous demonstration just a few months ago where he got his ass handed to him by counter-protesters. But then we fast forward to this last Saturday where you had Lang organizing what he called an Americans Against Islamification demonstration outside of Gracie Mansion, which of course is the mayor's official residence.
We're going to make sure that America knows this is a white Christian country. We're going to keep it that way. God bless America. We're going to make sure Mandami knows we're not welcome in New York City.
The promo material for this thing, it was, let's call it flagrant, right? Imagery that a lot of people recognize as dog whistles, calling back to the Klan, aimed directly at Mamdani, who Lang described as the #1 Muslim worldwide. With Lang showing up with about 20 followers and counter-protesters grew to over 100. And so as both sides are facing off, things start escalating. Right, one of Lang's followers sprayed mace at a group of counter-protesters, fistfights broke out, and then 2 smoking objects were thrown into the crowd. You had 18-year-old Amir Balak and 19-year-old Ibrahim Nik, who's also been named in reports as Ibrahim Kayumi, charged for the attack as well. Both were arrested Saturday, and luckily and thankfully, there were no injuries reported. Now with this on Sunday, you had officials roping off an area a few blocks from Gracie Mansion where they found a car belonging to one of the suspects. One source told the New York Times that they didn't recover additional devices from the car, but another source says that there were materials to make another one inside. It was reported today that there was in fact another device in the car, but it didn't contain explosive materials.
They were improvised explosive devices that could have caused serious injury or death.
That tree is a flora colossus, and his name is Groot.
Deployed by the subjects contained the substance triacetone triperoxide, known as TATP. Now, TATP is a dangerous and highly volatile homemade explosive that has been used in IED attacks around the world.
And with us, you have the FBI, NYPD, Joint Terrorism Task Force leading the investigation, along with federal prosecutors from the Southern District of New York.
I can confirm this morning that this is being investigated as an act of ISIS-inspired terrorism.
With reports saying that at least one of the suspects expressed sympathy for ISIS content that he'd seen online, and that the attack was at least partially motivated by the kind of hatred that Lang's been directing at the Muslim community. With many now pointing to clips like this.
There are 53 Muslim majority countries, and in all of them, it is tyranny, destruction, it is shithole living. We have to call it what it is. You guys don't live like we do. We don't want you in our country. We will come and eat your shawarma in Somalia. We don't want you here. respectfully, get the fuck out of my country.
Also with the situation, as things are developing, we're receiving updates. Like today, we got updates that both suspects reportedly said that religion was in fact the motivation for the attack. The FBI also adding that the men wanted to make this attack deadlier than the Boston Marathon bombing. Also, as far as Mamdani, you had him making his position clear that no matter the demonstration, it should never end in this type of attack.
This was a vile protest rooted in white supremacy. I'm the first Muslim mayor of our city. Anti-Muslim bigotry is nothing new to me, nor is it anything new for the 1 million or so Muslim New Yorkers who know this city as our home. While I found this protest appalling, I will not waver in my belief that it should be allowed to happen.
And today you had Mamdani adding that this was a heinous act of terrorism, and regarding the two suspects, that they should be held fully accountable for their actions. You know, one of the things that you have people saying that's going to make this even more frustrating and concerning is that the bombing is going to make Mamdani's job harder to do. His approval ratings at an all-time high. He's organizing programs like the citywide shoveling program that dug New York out of some genuinely dangerous winter storms this year. And in addition to a number of things, he's somehow managed to keep the president relatively cooperative on things like affordable housing. You know, that's also not to say that everyone loves the guy. Over 60% of New York Republicans are still not on board. But the city so far seems to be getting some real results outside of this insanity. On one side, you have what are often right-wingers convinced that there's some black or brown boogeyman coming to destroy their way of life. And then on the other side, you have various cultures feeling ostracized and cornered, which is leading to more concerning reports of people deciding to take things into their own hands and going to extreme measures to, in their eyes, fight back. But make no mistake, if someone was killed here, that's just murder. And all of these flames, they're constantly being fanned by an administration who has continued to skew facts and fearmonger as a war that they're also not calling a war continues. And actually, on that note, the selling of the Trump administration story about the war and Iran, it might be harder than ever, both at home and abroad, thanks to Kari Lake. That is, unless a federal judge in D.C. gets his way. Or because Judge Royce Lamberth just ruled that Kari Lake's leadership of the U.S. Agency for Global Media is unlawful. With this ruling, Lamberth's invalidated everything that Lake's done during her time, including laying off hundreds of people and the cuts to broadcasters both here in the States and around the world. And so now one of the biggest questions is whether this ruling's actually going to stick. But also, before we look ahead, we need to back up a bit because the U.S. Agency for Global Media is the umbrella for many news outlets, including Voice of America. And that actually began broadcasting back in 1942 during World War II to combat Nazi and Japanese propaganda. Right? And also included Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty, which kicked off in the 50s as a part of a CIA-backed initiative to stir up dissent against communism in the Soviet Union. The walls of the CIA reportedly stopped being involved in the 70s. There's also Radio and Television Marti, a network established in 1983 to break through Cuban censorship, and Radio Free Asia, aimed at a response to the 1989 Tiananmen Square massacre in Beijing. And then there's the Middle Eastern broadcasting networks, which were created in 2004. And that notably includes Radio Farda as the Iranian brand. Right, and all of these, they're fully funded by the USAGM, delivering the news in dozens of languages and reaching hundreds of millions of people around the world. And, you know, they brought news to places with incredibly limited press freedoms. And despite, you know, how they started, they had full editorial independence for decades. The agency's charter requires journalists to deliver actual news and information rather than just being a government mouthpiece. And you had the so-called firewall, referring to policies that insulate them, their content, and their staff from political influence. But that firewall, it came under attack during Trump's first administration, with Trump's hand-picked leader doing his best to chip away at the agency's editorial independence by punishing journalists who wouldn't fall in line to back Trump. A move that naturally led to some lengthy court battles and eventually a federal inquiry that found Trump's hand-picked leader had, at least in some cases, violated the law. And I guess because history and the Trump administration repeat itself, we're back to the same place again, though this time with Kari Lake as Trump's chosen. Right, and Kari Lake, she's a former television anchor who unsuccessfully ran for both a U.S. Senate seat and for governor in Arizona. She is very much a die-hard Trump believer, and because Trump rewards loyalty like that, Trump placed her in charge of the USAGM when he came back into office, and he charged her with bringing it down. Right, a year ago, he issued an executive order demanding the drawdown of the agency, which prompted Lake to put most staffers on administrative leave and cut hundreds of contractors. And so that, along with other actions, it led to her largely dismantling Voice of America, which is then in turn led to several legal challenges and even defeats for the Trump administration. In fact, Judge Lamberth's ruling, it came from a case brought against Lake and the USAGM by several employees who were laid off, including Voice of America's White House bureau chief and other journalists. And you had a statement from the plaintiffs reading, "The judge's ruling that Kari Lake's action shall have no force or effect is a powerful step toward undoing the damage she has inflicted on this American institution that we love." And adding, even as we work through what this ruling means for colleagues harmed by her actions, it brings renewed hope and momentum to the next phase of our fight, restoring VOA's global operations and ensuring we continue to produce journalism, not propaganda. Now with this, an important thing to note is that Lake does not technically hold the position of CEO of USAGM, which is the part part that requires congressional approval. Technically, she was named senior advisor to acting chief executive Victor Morales, who then delegated his authorities to her. Though she has also repeatedly referred to herself as acting CEO or deputy CEO, which has led to some confusion about what title she actually has. But that also wasn't enough for Lamberth. He rejected the argument, saying, quote, allowing the president to circumvent Congress's carefully crafted limitations through delegations would violate the spirit of the Constitution. Now, as you can imagine, Lake was not exactly thrilled with Lamberth's ruling, saying in her response, the American people gave President Trump a mandate to cut bloated bureaucracy, eliminate waste, and restore accountability to government, and saying an activist judge is trying to stand in the way of those efforts at USAGM. We strongly disagree with this decision and will appeal. And so now it's just a matter of, whether or not this is going to live through the appeals process, especially if it makes it all the way to the top. But if it is upheld, it would allow more than 1,000 journalists and support staff members to go back to their jobs. But then also another question is what exactly Kerry's going to be doing from now to whenever this gets resolved, and if not her, who's going to be in charge? And with that, we might actually get an answer later this week, with Lamberth requesting the government provide clarity on who the acting CEO actually is by March 11th, as well as provide a succession plan for the position. But then actually from that, it brings us to the final bit of news we need to talk about today, and that is that Trump is threatening to not sign any legislation until the SAVE Act becomes law. With him writing yesterday, it must be done immediately. It supersedes everything else. Must go to the front of the line. I, as president, will not sign other bills until this is passed. And the SAVE Act, as you likely know, because we've been talking about it so much, it mandates stricter voting registration and ID policies. It requires voters to prove their citizenship with documents like a passport or birth certificate, even though it's already illegal for non-citizens to vote in federal elections. And again, no matter how much Trump tries to peddle conspiracies about it, non-citizen voting is incredibly rare. So, some fear that this isn't really going to help with election integrity, and instead it's actually going to hurt it. Because in a number of ways, it would actually make it harder for eligible citizens to vote. Among other things, only half of Americans have a passport, and the process to get one can be lengthy and costly. There's also the huge crackdown on mail-in voting, but still, it passed the Republican-controlled House last month, and now it sits in the Senate's hands. And Trump has made it incredibly clear that he wants the Senate to move, telling the chamber to focus exclusively on this act if necessary. He even previously said that he'd close the government over the SAVE Act because it's such a high priority, and he added yesterday, and not the watered-down version, go for the goal. Must show voter ID and proof of citizenship, no mail-in ballots except for military, illness, disability, travel, and then saying for this thing that's supposed to be about election integrity, no men and women's sports, no transgender mutilization for children, do not fail. Right, and those last provisions there regarding trans athletes and gender reassignment surgery, they were notably not even in the version signed by the House, so he's asking for even more to go in a new bill, which many see as an incredibly big ask considering the odds in the Senate are tough. Where Democrats largely don't support it, and Republicans only have a razor-thin majority, and they need 60 votes to get it passed. And while Trump's previously urged his party to get rid of the filibuster to pass it, Majority Leader John Thune has pushed back on those calls. Right, then on top of that, some Republicans have even spoken out against the act, saying that they're unwilling to pass it in its current form. And so you had Minority Leader Chuck Schumer seeing Trump's legislative threat and writing, the SAVE Act is Jim Crow 2.0. It would disenfranchise tens of millions of people. If Trump is saying he won't sign any bills until the SAVE Act is passed, then so be it. There will be total gridlock in the Senate. Senate Democrats will not help pass the SAVE Act under any circumstances. With then other lawmakers slamming Trump for putting this so high on his to-do list, arguing nothing to lower grocery prices, nothing to lower gas bills, nothing to lower housing prices. The president says he won't make life easier until he makes it harder for you to vote. And then some arguing that Trump's pose could mean a longer shutdown for the Department of Homeland Security. You may have forgotten because it feels like it's faded to like a background C plot, but there's been a partial government shutdown impacting DHS for a few weeks now. Funding ran out in mid-February as Democrats refused to line the department's pockets anymore until there are meaningful reforms to ICE's operations. But with that, TSA also falls under the DHS umbrella. And while TSA staff are considered essential and they work during the shutdown, they're not getting paid. And so this weekend, we saw tons of travel issues tied to shortages of security staff and major airports reporting incredibly long lines. As of this morning, New Orleans said that wait times could be up to 2 hours. Houston's website estimates that its security line is about 3 hours. And so, some people have missed their flights because of the chaos, and airports are warning passengers to get to the airports incredibly early to handle these wait times. Now, for its part, the Trump administration has blamed Democrats for the shutdown and any effects it has, accusing what they call the radical left of playing politics with their homeland security. But one, Democrats have defended their choice, saying that it's on Republicans to agree to ICE reforms, which American citizens largely support. And two, you also have people arguing that Trump and Republicans are playing politics just the same, especially now that Trump's threatening to not sign any legislation until the SAVE Act passes. And so you have some wondering where Trump actually draws the line there. Or would he go so far as to not sign any potential future DHS funding if the SAVE Act is still sitting in the Senate? And, as the shutdowns lingered, we've seen the travel industry urging both sides to get back to negotiating, arguing that TSA should not have to work without pay so soon after the nation's longest government shutdown, especially since so many of them can't afford to miss paychecks, which is then forcing them to call out so they can get other gigs to pay their bills in the meantime. Right? So you have people like the CEO of the U.S. Travel Association saying it's not just unfair, it's reckless. You can't run an industry with $3 trillion in economic impact on IOT IOUs. And also the CEO of Airlines for America arguing, we are in spring break travel season and expecting record numbers of people to take to the skies. Airlines have done their part to prepare. Now Congress and the administration must act with urgency to reach a deal that reopens DHS and ends the shutdown. America's transportation security workforce is too important to be used as political leverage. But for now, we'll have to wait to see if all these travel disruptions force Congress to negotiate further, if Republicans will agree to any ICE reforms, and how long Democrats are going to hold out. And then also, if a deal is reached between both parties for funding, will he sign it if the SAVE Act has not been signed? You know, with so many unknowns, we move our eyes forward to the week ahead. Because yes, while we're getting to the end of today's Philip DeFranco show, I'm going to see you right back here tomorrow. And in the meantime, you should check out another video I put out for you today, and that is my In Good Faith podcast with Jon Favreau. It went out just before this. I think you'll love it. I got links in the description and things you can click. But no matter what, I'll see you right back here tomorrow.
Yes, sir. Mod Trigger, back up in this thing, man. Today, we'll be taking a look at some mysterious videos that'll give you the chills. But before we hop into that, go ahead and spam that like button right now so we can run the numbers up on the algorithm. And you ain't even gotta think about it later. And if you haven't already, go ahead and hit that sub button too. Sub up, join the family. This is the most lit and active community on YouTube, period. With that being said, guys, let's hop straight into the video.
Symbolism in this runway show you're about to watch goes very deep, and it may make you uncomfortable. This is by far the most controversial runway show in Paris Fashion Week this year, and just pay very close attention to every single thing that they're wearing, the things in their eyes, on their mouth, on their feet, on their hands. This video we're about to watch is going to break down every single thing that they're wearing. This show is called The 1%.
It's just that, the call out of the 1%. The first part is introduction to a bourgeois family. You meet the mothers, fathers, daughters of the family. A lot of them wearing white gloves with red palms titled guilt gloves, symbolizing that there's blood on their hands. Some characters even choking on the accessories, symbolizing the greed. Wearing shirts saying I love power, and literally being blinded with money. Instead of handcuffs, their hands are tied with pearl necklaces. Their pursuit of beauty and youth being one thing that they can never attain. The second part represents the power of community. This is also a call out of the 1%. It also is a reference how the Métier Fécal team has been referred to since their last debut in Paris. They're constantly called the cult, which can be easily said about 1%. Also, the last part is the power of the future, where Hannah shows up in albino python cocoon skirt, the heelless skin boot morphing into her leg, showing that the 1% have access to tools of life that most of us don't. Michelle Ami walks the show as a representation of bracing the natural beauty of aging and no need to play pretend. This fashion show is a commentary on society that we live in. This is what fashion does the most. Provoke. The collection might leave you uncomfortable, but the question is, doesn't society already make you feel?
If this is what they consider fashion in 2026, then we truly live in some strange times, because they have Michelle Lamy looking like an emo Lorax.
A lab in Australia has trained a cluster of human brain cells living on a microchip to play Doom. Well, yeah, obviously, technically, human brain cells can already play Doom, but it's a bit more impressive than that. Scientists at Cortical Labs confirmed in a YouTube video that its CL1 biological computer, which has about 200,000 living neurons that have been grown on a microchip, is able to play Doom about as well as someone who's never touched a computer in their life. Not about as well as you, then. Will you shut up? The gameplay of Doom is converted into electrical stimulation patterns which are interpreted by the neurons. So if an enemy appears on one side of the screen, that side of the neurons are stimulated and, you know, pew pew. Apparently the cells are capable of basic learning and adaptation, which is vaguely unsettling, but famously scientists doing experiments like these are always ethical, so it should be fine.
My thing is, why couldn't they train it to play Madden or Candy Crush? Why do we have to start with a shooting game? This feels like Skynet training. I'm not sure what's causing this, but if your coffee is already bubbling up in the cup like this, I would avoid drinking it, because if you do, your stomach gonna sound like a cargo ship horn.
Y'all, I was on my flight Friday morning. I looked out my window, and mind you, we're above the clouds. So this is like on top of the clouds. What is that? What is it?
Either these are smokestacks from some sort of power plant and the cloud level is just really low, or this is a cloud factory.
You know what Ford has? A patent for vehicles to be able to repossess themselves. And I read it so you don't have to. That's you, number 120. That's your repossession computer, that's a camera, and that's a camera. But we'll come back to the cameras. In the event that you become delinquent on your payments, the computers will then begin to communicate with each other. One of those computers will be your lending institution. Now, warning messages will be sent to you. In the event that you do not answer those messages or try to resolve your delinquency, the first step will be to make you become uncomfortable to drive the vehicle, such as disabling things like cruise control, your automatic windows, your automatic seats, or the infotainment system. Step 2, when you, number 120, come near the vehicle, an unpleasant noise will continue to be played. You will not be able to shut off that sound without contacting, that's right, your lending institution. If, in spite of the sound produced, you still fail to respond to their messages and fix your delinquency, they will then move on to the next phase, which is disabling some, if not all, of the primary use components. For example, the engine, the brakes, the accelerator, the steering wheel, the doors, and lights of the vehicle. You know, everything you'd need to drive. You remember the cameras I told you about, 130 and 140? Yeah, well, they would be able to use those for video clips or even video streaming to see if your vehicle is parked inside a garage. Now, should it get to this point, the vehicle will autonomously drive itself from the owner's premises to either a repossession agency, an impound yard, or any other predetermined location. So if you'd like to read this for yourself, there's the patent number. Now, a spokesperson for Ford said, "We don't have any plans to deploy this," and I'm thinking it's probably because they don't know how they'd get it out of a garage if it's in one. Just a thought. Anyway, they say, "We submit patents to new inventions all the time. It doesn't mean it's a new business or product plan."
This is corporate greed 101. They can come up with the technology for your car to repossess itself if you're late on your bill, but if somebody steals your car, they don't have the technology to return it back to you. This makes me want to start examining my food a lot closer, because if I would have found this, I would already be on the phone with JG Wentworth trying to get cash now for my structured settlement.
I'm not quite sure what I just witnessed right now, but it was more than one event and I've got them all on camera. First, I noticed this dark spot in the moon, and I'm going to shorten these clips, but this one, not long after I saw this, I don't know what I'm looking at. There's nothing up there. There's not a mountain or anything for anyone to be on. I'm gonna show a couple stills, and then wait till you see what happened afterwards. This is to show how high up it was. Then a couple minutes after, I noticed they came by spraying, and they made an X, or a cross. It almost looks like a cross on its side. Then a couple minutes later, they came through, sprayed even more. A couple minutes later, completely blocked it. I don't know. If you stuck around this long, tell me what you think.
The dead giveaway that this actually is something is the fact that they're cloud seeding at night, because it seems like they're trying to hide whatever that is. If I ever saw a toy doing this, this would be a sign to get rid of it, because your Furby should never look like it just got done with an MK Ultra session.
Salat. Oh my God. Jesus Christ. Salat. Oh dear. Oh, what I'm gonna waiting. Need to be the necessary. Jesus Christ.
The box is kind of shaped like a treasure chest, so for a second I thought he was going to open it up and it was going to be gold coins in there, not a Dybbuk box. Now he just released a curse on the whole neighborhood.
At 12:50 a.m., the security alarm goes off, says there's an intruder. After playing back the footage, the homeowner was confused. What happened here? I personally watched this footage over and over again, and the only excuse I can come up with was possibly a direct energy weapon or something interdimensional. You do hear a loud blast going off, and then on camera you see a shockwave begin to roll by. This definitely goes down as unexplainable. Leave your thoughts below.